A few years ago, some aristocrats and capitalists got together to plug technology into our classrooms, and we saw interactive whiteboards, more computers, Wi-Fis, more laptops, class sets of laptops, netbooks, more laptops, 3D classroom sets, and all this equipment is going in, and are our kids getting any smarter? They're still turning up to university unable to write an essay. Sorry. So, and now there's reports going out saying that we should have one iPad or one individualized, personally owned laptop per child. Where is this madness going to end? And what is the reasons for it anyway? Let's talk about that. So, throughout the technology revolution, there has been this motive to bring one laptop per to each child, both in the developed world and the developing world. What you see here, I don't know if any of you have seen this image before, is the concept one laptop per child computer, which was to be produced economically and cheaply, and through charitable donations and other means delivered to children across the globe, where it could be powered through low power so that these children could use a laptop. This isn't the only iteration. We, at home, because we don't need a laptop that looks like Shrek, we can have a netbook. Again, cheap parts, slightly out-of-date equipment, but it still powers, you know, Windows XP or Windows 7 Starter Edition, and you can get yourself a little computer that does lots and lots of good stuff for below £200. Oops, hang on, no. Yeah. And it's the sub £200 laptop which has had a lot of impact in deciding, can we really deliver a computer to every individual? But that leaves us now with the iPad, because, let's face it, how many people nowadays have an iPad? It's phenomenally expensive compared with anything else on the market, but it's got an appeal to it that says it's portable, it's connected, it works efficiently, and it does a very high quality and an aesthetically appealing job of the different things we need to do, whether it's in education or business. And that is, there's a lot of debate at this point whether, in fact, let's go to the next one. There's a lot of debate at the moment whether we should be kitting schools out with these on an individual basis. Some schools have tried it and some schools haven't. Now, you want to go back one? Fighting against that is our good friend Donald Clark, and he puts out some fantastic reasons why the tablets would not be used correctly. And if you just look through these, we see that, again, there's no tactile feedback when you're using an iPad. It's not a creation device. You don't have those same sort of abilities as you do with your mouse and keyboard to create, to edit, to fine-tune and adjust. They are a bit awkward to use. If you want to do something that's somewhat technical, he describes coding as ridiculous. And of course, the Apple culture is a very proprietary set of software. You know, you need, I mean, look at the setup that we've got today. We had to find these £25 connectors just to plug the laptop into the projector. And it's the same across the board with the Apple TV, with the connectors to projectors, and even with the apps and the cases and the things to protect them and the maintenance and the servicing. And of course, last of all, in a few case studies, it was found that while these iPads were being given to students in schools, they were coming back with smashed screens because they've been chucked in a school bag, they were bust to pieces, coming back for 2 or 3 repairs throughout the year. They just weren't being cared for. Okay, so what we have here is a government commissioned report written by Kevin Burden from the University of Hull. What can the iPad do? As I read through, these are the things that the iPad can do that, well, some of these things a traditional computer can do as well, but certainly the pen and paper just aren't quite as good at. Let's face it, they're fun to play on. There's plenty of novel content on the App Store. It gets kids doing things off their own back. I think the real thing that it can do is this whole connectivist, create media, create videos, create images, create infographics, create presentations, and to share those. I mean, despite all the Apple proprietary technology, the connection between an iPad and an Apple TV to project is almost seamless. And so it does create for a serendipitous synthesis of content, which is what we know in an autonomy supportive environment creates deep encoding. Last of all, skill and drill. It's not elaborative, it's not creative, but if we're learning that rote base, if we're learning a behavioral skill, there are apps that you can do, you can play a little game, and it will drill that behavior into you. It's got some use. This is how iPads shouldn't be used, and this is something that I do want to critique out of the paper. When they said that they use it in an art class to use their finger to draw art and pictures, I just put my head in my hands and thought, that is not the curation of a skill, is it? And so that was one of the demonstrations, in my opinion, of a misuse of the iPad. But what did they get right? Now, here's a graph that models their use of the iPad. Now, look at what they use the most. Pages. It's the Apple word processing package. So, I'm afraid to say the things that they used the iPad for were writing. Because you can't do that on a PC, you can't do that on paper, can you? But I looked at the other apps that they'd been using, which were used less, but I was actually quite impressed that at least they were producing something, at least they were creating and synthesizing and putting something together, especially when they used packages like Keynote or GarageBand. Not as convinced about Minecraft or brushes, but there we go. The thing is, if we go on to the secondary school use of apps, it had all but gone. Bejeweled. FaceTime. Anyway, but the little introduction here that at least showed me there was some redemption was iMovie. And I think that is the real area of strength that the iPad has. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. Yeah. But this was another chart out of the report that demonstrated how the iPads were being used in lessons. And this green bit here, and this green bit here, is what I really love. And this is where I think it can really do something. Because unlike a netbook, the iPad is portable. It is slim, it's carryable, it's well connected. You can go out, you can take pictures, you can record footage, you can find information, you can store it, you can centralize it, and you can share it. And I was glad to see that this was really being put to use. I'm going to share a couple of quotes now of teachers that were using it. So a class teacher at one of the primary schools. So at first I was thinking, right, what will I do with the iPad? And I was sort of thinking, right, what could I do for maths? Or how could I do spelling differently? And then it kind of evolves as you realize from hearing what other people do on blogs and things that it evolves into understanding it. It's a much more creative tool. It allows them to publish and to create movies and to show their demonstrations of understanding through different media. And then it kind of becomes a more versatile tool. Another quote out of the report: "The feature of personal networked devices challenges many of the assumptions and paradigms around which traditional models of teaching and learning are constructed, learning the authority and including the authority and expertise of the teacher, the role of the learner as an author and producer of knowledge rather than simply a consumer, and the power relationships which exist between teacher and learner when the teacher is no longer the sole arbiter or conduit to knowledge and truth. These issues are addressed in the discussion section." And yeah. I'm going to close with a mood board, because this is how I see it coming together. We've all got those of us who don't have an iPhone or an iPad, this button is the share button. And it's the feature of the iPad that connects it to all the different platforms that you could use. But this is how I see the iPad being an effective tool. Now the teachers were only slow to discover it in the iPad report, but as you saw from those last two quotes, some of them started to tap into this idea that you can give kids a real-world problem. You've got iMovie for curation, you've got Dropbox for centralization and sharing, you've got Mail for communication. Let's imagine these are primary school kids, they may not be old enough to use Facebook or Twitter yet. You have wikis, you have Scoop It, and they can sit there in the classroom, discuss their ideas and start to create. And it's been done in classrooms by Diana Laufenberg and other classroom teachers. I'd refer you to her TED Talk for more details on that. But what I can see here is that actually tablets, even the iPad specifically, have some unique potential for real collaborative, connectivist, social, deep learning. Thank you. Any questions, Joko? Yourself, sir.
Yes, you've talked about the theory behind it all, but I was wondering about the practicality, because I've heard of stories where the school have brought out iPads for every student, and within a week have done a 180 and taken all the iPads back because all the kids jailbreak it and they're all on Facebook and games, and not all the iPads came back, quite a few went missing.
It's a risk. It's a very genuine risk because, yes, there are two types of technology, those that have failed and those that will. And, you know, we could lock it down, but at the same time that would restrict their use of it. So, can I say I don't know on that one, but assume that if we think creatively, we can get around it?
It was already locked, they just broke it.
Yeah, commenting on what Chris just said, why were they locked down in the first place? Because you lock them down in order to inhibit what students can do with them, to inhibit their creativity, and in order to create a conformist type atmosphere. So why would they lock them down in the first place? To say you can't do the things that an iPad is built to allow you to do. So I think the other thing that James alluded to at the end is a lot of these teachers were slow to pick up on what the iPad would be very good at and very good for. That's my fear with what, you know, you supply everybody with a 400 or 500 or 600 pound iPad to play with and lock it down and give them two programs that you want them to work on, a maths and a phonics program. And there are a lot of schools, that's exactly what they're doing. That's all they're allowing them to do. Why?
Another thought is, I mean, sure, I've jailbroken my iPod before. Sorry, Apple. But after jailbreaking and thinking, isn't this cool? I've got a different background and funny layouts. I thought, now what? So maybe if we do not restrict them, but let them, you know, stretch that to its limit, then they go, oh, fair enough. Now I'll go back and do my work. Matthew.
Back to the point you were making, would it be better if we just assigned an iPod to each student and then they iPod for the student through education, because the amount of money education spends on books, pencils, rubbers, blackboard equipment, wouldn't it just be cheaper just to assign each student an iPod and say, well, that's yours, and obviously to finish education and
Well, I mean, interestingly with the finance, what Donald Clark described in one of his blogs was that, you know, the schools these days can become academies and they get an extra £500,000 funding. That's enough money to buy every child an iPad. And £500,000 is a lot of money, but in a school, is it really? And so
a book can't actually do what an iPad can.
it can't. I would argue, though, that a book can do what an iPad can't. I find a lot more enjoyment and fulfillment and meaning sometimes when I print the research paper and read it, as opposed to sitting and confining it to my iPad screen. Oh, I did, yeah, absolutely. So they both have their place, I would say, and I don't think it's I mean, it's a bit of a expense, but is it mind-bogglingly expensive? Jesse?
I was watching what my grandson was doing on an iPad a couple of weeks ago. He came over to me and he says, "Oh, let's do something, you know, rather than just play his Batman game." We went and were looking for the pizza place in Canada that we went to, you know, a year and a half ago. Used Google Maps to go and find this pizza place where he discovered that he loved pizza. He then took the iPad away and spent the next hour exploring the world. And he found New York. He can't read, but he knew it was New York. He was looking at all the different pictures of it. And as I was watching him, I was thinking, you know, why can't these kids take something like an iPad and go 300 yards down the road from the school they're in, take pictures of the burial mound that's out there, post it on the web, on Google Maps, write little things about, okay, this is what it is, share it with another school and say, what do you have in your area that would be really cool?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, okay, here's a maths drill that we want you to spend 4 hours on. Have fun with your iPad.
You're right. Go.
Isn't the problem as well that we just don't have a transition period? Like, we're going from the model of teaching that we're now having to suggesting that every student should have an iPad. Shouldn't we have something to help teachers, to help the education institutions transition into that?
We should, absolutely, and I think that's what the report demonstrates, that the teachers that made the good use of it had to do that themselves. They had to take their own initiative, get on the blogosphere, not the research papers, because there's not too much written about it in the literature, but in the blogosphere, where anecdote rules, there's tons of ideas and tons of inspiration. But yes, something would need to be done, in my view, to bring that widespread. Louise?
Well, the schools in my local area, they gave every child a netbook thing.
Yeah.
But those schools subsidised it quite a lot. They had to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
To do it like for £10 every month. They had to like sort of basically buy their netbook from the school, and at the end of their term, that was their laptop. And would that be a better way of doing the iPad thing rather than just loading it to them?
It's one. Sorry. It's certainly one way of doing it, and I think that's a political/governance issue, because the equality argument would come out and say, what about the kids that can't afford that? And, you know, at the end of the day...
What about if you just pay the insurance on it, which is less than £10 a month?
So another way of looking at it. Pardon?
Why we just concentrate on just iPad alone? What about...
I have focused on the iPad specifically, because that is what...
Android is like, you know, much cheaper.
I
Much more accessible to people.
I was at a conference a couple of years ago. And the education minister from Uruguay was there, presenting about one laptop per child and how they're using it in Uruguay.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fantastic. I've been to 2 or 3 of these talks, and what they're doing with them is absolutely brilliant. And I asked the question, why is it that Uruguay and Paraguay and Rwanda and Cambodia and all of these places are giving 1 laptop per child, but in Britain we can't do that? Why is it that they're able to do it, but we're not?
It's not down to finance. People make
Yeah, because Uruguay is much more wealthy than Britain.
That's what I'm saying. The people make the box and God knows what. Wouldn't they put them out of business?
It's another political question. We could do it. We could comfortably do it on the GDP that this country takes in. However, again, I think it's political. It's to do with who's going to win the next election. Decides what they're going to... Which...
Who's donating money to the political parties?
Yeah. So we know that the evidence, based on how we learn and think and how we encode, says one thing. We know that the politicians, the aristocrats, the capitalists who have a lot of financial power say another. What side are we on?
Oh, what a question.
On that note.
On that bombshell, thank you for watching.